Okay, so let's talk about this tool called the Kolbe. What is it? How do you describe what it is to people?
Yeah, so it's Kolbe, Kolbe, and it's the company's been around for several decades. It's not my intellectual property; it's theirs. They created this assessment. Kathy Kolbe's the one that originally has created it, and they've used it in corporations all throughout the world. And it is not a personality test. It's not measuring your intelligence or your social style. It is measuring how you take action. And often what's really helpful is the order, like how you start problem solving when you're striving to solve a problem based on these like four action modes that it's looking at.
Okay, and then in your opinion, because I know that you are personally kind of an Enneagram expert as well, what do you see as being one of the biggest differences between the two?
Yeah, so I call myself an Enneagram enthusiast.
Enthusiast, there we go.
Yeah, I'm really into it, but I certainly have am not certified in it, or it's more just my own personal process. But I would say the biggest difference is they really are measuring different things. Where Enneagram is why you do the things you do, like your motivation for why you're doing it, and then Kolbe is how you're going to do it.
So good. Okay.
And so then similarly, but sorry to interrupt, they both of them like don't change over time. Just like Enneagram, Kolbe, once you take it once and you have your four numbers, those are your numbers. They have done lots of research over time to show that it is valid over time. It doesn't change. It's instinctively how you take action.
Okay. And one of the other things that I've noticed as I've been just doing a little bit of research for this with our interview is that the Enneagram is more kind of, well, it's not more, it is kind of an open source assessment. Like all kinds of people can teach it different ways. You can rename things, and there's no Enneagram police.
Right.
But with the Kolbe, it's a little different. Am I correct?
Yes, absolutely. So this is, like I mentioned, if you go to kolbe.com, that is their website. It's they certify people to teach it. So I'm a certified consultant through them. And as part of that, I went through their certification process, and their things I do every year to, keep up with the information. Anytime I'm sharing about it, I go through, like I just wrote several blogs about it that are I've sent to them, and they're pending approval, for them to read. There's definitely, because it's there, they have put all of this research behind it. And that's one of the things that drew me to it, because it's been validated with all of this research. And yes.
Well, I was going to say, so depending on your Enneagram type, you might prefer, or, the Kolbe because of some of that. So, yeah. And then I want to ask too, so how do you see it being used? Maybe let's start with an individual, and then how a team or a leader could use it. So how could an individual use what they learn? And we're going to get, because you mentioned the four numbers, there's four colors. We're going to get into that in just a second. But just to kind of, again, lay the foundation, how could somebody use the Kolbe in their career or just personal development?
Yeah, great. And it's definitely has applications for both that are really powerful. So for the individual, I think it can help you make decisions, particularly as most everybody that I work with, they're entrepreneurs. So it can help you decide. It's not so much like what kind of business you could create, because that's going to depend a lot on, your cognitive skills, all of that. But it's how you'll grow your business. So it might inform, for example, if one part, like I was meeting with someone last week, and this is even right before this call, I was meeting with an entrepreneur who he's just 2 months on his own, and he does financial advising. And his numbers, he leads in fact finding. And then his next is called implementer, but it's how much you demonstrate or show what you know. And I went to his website and he had a video where he specifically said he takes complex information and makes it concrete and tangible for people. And that was just a beautiful way. He didn't even know Kolbe, but he was using it beautifully in his business to really leverage his strengths. So you can imagine, as a financial advisor, there's all of this complex information that he is helping people understand, but then he uses his implementer to really demonstrate it. Like, he even had a one page on his site that you could access that gave you a demonstration, a model of what a financial plan could look like when you work with him. And that was just such a great way of leveraging his strengths to help him grow his business in a way that's going to look different than another financial advisor who might have a different Kolbe.
So good. Okay. So let's go ahead and get into those, and we'll come back to how teams can use it, because I want to, and that might actually make more sense. So you mentioned the fact finder and the implementer. Let's go by each one, but just real quick, what are the 4, do you call them types or categories?
Action modes.
Action modes. Okay. So give us a quick summary on what those 4 are, and then we'll dive into each one.
Yeah, because it's the way, it's your approach, how you take action in each of these modes. So the first one, fact finder, is how you gather and share information. So there's a continuum in each of these modes. So your number shows where you fit on that continuum. The second number you'll get is called follow through. And that is your best way of organizing. That's really related to how much structure and process that you need when you're solving a problem. The third number is called quick start. And that is your method of dealing with risk and uncertainty. And then the fourth is implementer, which Kathy Kolbe has since said demonstrator is really a better word here. She meant implement as in tool. So it's not whether or not you implement. It's all about how you deal with physical space and tangible items and your need to demonstrate something.
Okay. And we're going to get into an example for each, just to kind of make that a little bit more how to use in real life. So let's start. And just for clarification, the scale what are the numbers?
Yes. 1 to 10.
Okay. 1 to 10. Okay. So I'm actually going to pull up my results. Okay. And I'm going to have Elizabeth kind of share what that means, and then maybe what the opposite end of the spectrum is, and where me and that other person might have some great synergy, but then where we might run into maybe a communication challenge of just how we work together type of challenge. So the first one is fact finder. I had a number 2. What does that mean, Kathy or Elizabeth? I'm calling you Kathy.
Yeah. So that means when it comes to information or data, your approach is going to be to bottom line it. It's not that you don't care about the information. It's just that you don't need as much in order to take action. Like, you can get the gist of something. You could read a summary. One thing I like to say is, like, you could probably read if you were given like a 400-page book that you needed to do to learn to do your job, you could read the Cliff Notes, and you would honestly be able to apply most of the concepts from reading the Cliff Notes. Like, that would work for you. I mean, does that sound right? How do you see this one? Because we have talked about it a little bit, so you'll be able to explain it a lot better than me, because I'm an 8 in this mode.
I was going to ask if you'd be willing to share. Yeah. Okay. So as an 8, we'll come to that. Yeah. I absolutely feel this one, because one of the examples that I had used was, like, I have so many books and they're all behind me. And when I go to the library, I just get like a huge handful. Like, I get like 6. And my boyfriend the other day was like, you're not going to read all these books. Like, why do you have all these books? And I know that I will not read them cover to cover. And that's not why I get them. I get them because I like to look at like the chapter titles and get ideas. I like to skim, and like I have them laying in every single room. And just like when I'm waiting for my coffee or, wherever, I'm like, oh, here's this book. I'll just pick up and like read a few sentences. And I'm like, oh, that's interesting. And I'll just kind of think about that. And I'm not worried, am I going to finish this book or not? For nonfiction or for fiction, that's a little different. I like to get through those. But that's just one example of that. Whereas it sounds like on the opposite end of the spectrum is where you are. So what does that look like for you or somebody else in a similar position?
Yeah. So I'm an 8 in this mode. So this is where I start, and this is where I spend the most time and energy. So it's funny that you say that, because in some ways we look similar in terms of my favorite activity, like to pass the time, would be to go to the library or the bookstore and just look at all the titles and like imagine learning about all these things. And just, I don't even have to learn them all, but just like imagine being able to read all these books is really fun for me. But what it looks like for me, and again, it's when it doesn't mean I'm going to do it in everything, but when I'm really into something, like when I first discovered the Enneagram, for example, I found every podcast there was to listen to. I found all of the books, a couple of the books I've read multiple times, like all the details. I'm going very precise into the information, and really wanting to like go very deep and precise and justify. Like if you ask me, for example, how'd you decide you were 6? Even you started to hear it a little bit in that, like I'm saying, well, there's this and there's that. And I could have gone on and on. Like I have, I have a pro and con list. I have, a lot. There's never like a quick answer for me, where you're more likely to be able to answer off the cuff, to be able to give a quick answer. So in communication, where we could frustrate each other is I could overshare to the point that like I have to watch and make sure your eyes aren't glazing over, and kind of wait to see what other questions you have and not go too deep in the detail. On the reverse, if I didn't know this about you, I could mistakenly think you didn't care about something if you weren't asking me more questions. I'd be like, oh, well, that didn't interest her that much, which may not be true. It may just mean I gave you enough information. You got it. You can move on. So that's one of where you can have a communication breakdown, particularly if you're working to another communication tip with this one is if you're working with someone who leads in fact finding, you really want to give them time to ask questions or gather the data they need before moving forward, even if you don't, because and it could frustrate you if you see them like it doesn't look like they're doing anything yet, but they're gathering data that's going to help them move into action. So kind of knowing that's where they're starting, they are working towards solving that problem, but that's where they're starting, can help reduce that frustration.
I'm kind of laughing because I'm thinking of this situation when I was on a team as part of someone else's company. We'd be given like a directive, like, okay, here's the goal. And, this is what you need to do today. And I'm like, okay, let's do it. And then there's somebody on our team, he would just have so many questions.
Yes.
I'd be like, oh my God. Stop asking so many questions. But like you said, that's what they need. And so just understanding, especially as that team leader, to work more effectively with each other, just really important to keep in mind. So you're probably not going to be perfect all the time, but just at least having that awareness.
Yeah. And that's a great segue to talk a little bit about team dynamics, because the idea is if everybody on the team was like jumping right in and getting started, you might be far down a road on the not necessarily the best strategy. Like you've taken action really quickly and started, making progress. But if you haven't stopped to kind of establish the criteria or set the priorities, you may be making a lot of progress in the wrong direction. And if everybody was like me, that, was spending a lot of time in setting the priorities, you could get stuck in that analysis paralysis. And, so the combination of partnering together and knowing which people should be in charge of which part of it, so that we could work together, will help the whole team make progress a lot more effectively with a lot less frustration, because you have the right people doing the task that come most naturally to them.
Yeah. And I will say, like, his questions were sometimes, like you said, like we would be like planning to go to a trade show, and he would ask like some really important question about like, well, like, how are we going to set up the booth? Or like, what are we putting on the booth? And everyone else is just like, let's get there. Right. So, exactly what you said, you need both of those dynamics. Yes. Very much. So, okay. The second action mode is the implementer. No.
Second is follow through.
Follow through. Okay. Sorry. I'm will just let you say this. Okay. So I had a 5 follow through, which kind of is in the middle. Maybe we could talk about like, what are the extremes, or like, what would somebody, on the extremes be looking like? Yeah.
So, the continuum is either if you start here, this is people who really, their strength is systematized. So they need a lot of structure and process, and that's what they naturally do. So often those are like the project manager types, the people who really can build out the workflow or the timeline really naturally. And that's what they do first. Like, they might start by creating a checklist or mapping out a plan. And people at the other end, their word is adapt. They're people who are going to kind of look for the shortcuts or do things differently each time. They have a lot of flexibility in their approach. So where you are in the middle, that can look like one of two things. That can look like that, depending on the situation, that like whether the other people you're working with or just whatever it is you're doing, sometimes you may create some processes or work with the process. And other times you're more kind of winging the process, depending on what's necessary in that situation. And your word is maintain. If someone gives you a system and says, this is how we do it, this is the workflow, you very naturally maintain that system. You're not like resisting working within a system, but you don't necessarily need it necessarily to take action. And you don't need it to be like you don't need a fully baked plan before you're going to get started.
Okay. And this is one that I found actually most eye-opening. Now that I'm like looking at my notes, I had started this because we had talked about the difference between like what comes most naturally for me as an individual, and then like what I know my business needs. And so I would, the kind of the winging it, more resonates with me. But then as I'm looking, like, I actually want more freedom. And in order to do that, I need to probably bring in people in the future. And in order to do that, I need to get all this stuff out of my head. So I'm looking at how can I make processes and systems. So that's maybe where that middle ground comes from right now anyway. And then the other thing that I found interesting was the idea of maintaining. And I loved what you had shared during our reading, because you had said maybe it might be a little bit more difficult for you to like create your own tracking process spreadsheet. But if you're given one, like you're okay with maintaining it. And that resonated with me so much, because I'm like, yes, I just need a template. If I can get a template, I'm good. But like, it's so difficult for me to see a blank page and like understand the steps without somebody pulling it out of me, I guess. So that was like, okay, I guess if I have to do that, then I may need to work with somebody to pull it out of me. Otherwise, I'm just going to continue to struggle and procrastinate on that project.
Yes. And the idea, again, it's not that you couldn't do it. It's just not going to be the best use of your time and energy. And so partnering with somebody else would be a great option for you.
Be very difficult. Okay. So the third one is called Quick Start. On mine, I had, let's see. Okay. Mine was a 9. Yeah.
Yes. So this is all about your method of dealing with risk and uncertainty. And so you start here. So I would love for you to share how this shows up for you in terms of your innovating and experimenting and brainstorming. Like, how does that show up in terms of helping you in your business or in your life?
Well, one of the things that resonates most with me as an Enneagram 7 is the ideas part. Like, I have a lot of ideas. I have a whiteboard over here that's a whole wall. I also have a really full idea graveyard of just ideas that never got executed
parking
on.
Lot.
Yes, a parking lot. There you go. There you go. Just parking lot. I like that better. And so I do, like, I see ideas all the time. And I think brainstorming, my coffee mug actually says brainstorming is my love language. And that very much resonates. And then when it comes time to actually do it or do it again and again, it's like, right. So I think I had shared with you, like, one of the things that I struggle with as a business owner is sticking to the plan, because I want to do all these different ideas. And so over the course of my own journey, having a business, I've realized, like, I'm constantly like having new ideas and shifting gears. And then I'm like, why did I do that? Was a good idea. Why did I change it? So I change for the sake of change sometimes, or it's like not exciting versus it's not working. And I would not know that it's not working because I did it one time. And I'm like, oh, did that, move on. So that is something that I don't know that I need to change about myself, but just be aware of and kind of question, not be so impulsive about gear shifting. Sometimes it can be a good thing, but also it can, be a detriment.
That was I knew you would illustrate it better than I could. So yes, that's exactly. So many of the things you mentioned are things I hear from people who lead in Quick Start. So that would be if you're 7, 8, 9, or 10 and Quick Start, that means that's where you start with that problem solving. So the idea behind it is not that, I do hear a lot of entrepreneurs say they kind of beat themselves up about it. Like, oh, I have all these ideas, but I haven't, stuck with them, or then feel this kind of shame around that. And the idea behind understanding this through the Kolbe lens is recognizing that this is where you're making your greatest contribution, and really figuring out how you can set up your business or your life that will allow you to capture those ideas and really allow you that space to have the ideas, but then build some structure around you or some accountability around you that can be a sort of a guardrail to help you identify the ones that are the most practical given your resources or your timeline, and help you stay focused on the ones that are most important for where you are right now. But it's not I hear a lot of people who lead in Quick Start say, I want to rein in my ideas. And that just makes me, I don't like that word, because we don't want to rein them in. Like, that's where your ideas is where you're really able to make the greatest contribution. But there are ways and strategies we can figure out how to create some support around you that allows you to still be in that idea space, but stay on track as well.
Okay. That's such a great point about like shaming yourself, because there's that book, like The One Thing. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yes.
And I'm like, oh, I will use that book to shame myself all the time. I'm like, oh, the one thing. So that's interesting. But what about somebody who is maybe on the opposite end of that spectrum? What does that look like for them?
Yeah. And I'm glad you asked this, because this is something I definitely want to bring up in terms of entrepreneurs. I hear people sometimes think, oh, if I don't lead in Quick Start, I can't be an entrepreneur. And that is absolutely not true. I have worked with so many entrepreneurs who are at the opposite end of that continuum. Now, it does inform how you will grow your business. You are much more likely to probably embrace a slow, deliberate growth more than a rapid growth strategy. So there are some, I mean, that's being very general, but it can inform how you grow your business, but anyone can be an entrepreneur. It's just going to show up differently. So at the other end, their word is stabilize. And so where you innovate, they are stabilizing. And so they are, when it comes to risk and uncertainty, they are creating a lot of standards. They are protecting what's already working. They are removing uncertainty and minimizing risk. So they're going to be clarifying deadlines. They're going to be the people that might feel like the Debbie Downer in terms of, to you, when you have a lot of ideas, they're going to be the kind of, oh, but what about this? What about this? Where they can make a really contribute. Yes, you're laughing. And so the idea, though, is once you both recognize that, like, this is the space I sit in, I'm a 3 in this mode. So now that and I feel this one very much. But now that I know this about myself, it helps me when I'm working with other people who sit like where you are. I also know, like, you're going to help me think of things in a way that I wouldn't have thought of before. And you're going to help me maybe spot trends that I might have not spotted. So we can support each other, and where I might be able to point out some watch outs or some things that could, some places where your ideas could go off track and cause problems. You're going to, like, I might be able to point out the worst case scenario. You're going to bring out the best case scenario and help me see that. So by partnering, you can see how in a team, particularly if you have someone in the middle to help mediate and navigate our conversations, that we can, when you have someone with all the approaches, it can really help move the team forward.
So interesting. And I know that the Kolbe doesn't necessarily complement or overlap with the Enneagram, but as you were talking, I was thinking of one of my good friends who also has her own business. She's a type 6, and she is so great at all those things that you were just saying, kind of seeing the blind spots, the potential potholes, what could go wrong. And then also just offering additional ideas around like how to actually make it happen. And so we've talked about hosting an event together, and she's like, you can name the things. You're good at naming things.
Yes, exactly.
And so, that feels like a good partnership, and I would feel really good about that. But I could also see how we could maybe frustrate each other in that process. But again, just kind of understanding how people see the world differently than us.
Yes. But that was such a great illustration of exactly how you could use Kolbe to help you divide up the task. And on that, just one suggestion there with your friend, if there's a number, if one of the modes that you're in the same, you're more similar, that can sometimes be a place where you can find common ground. Like for you and I, we are both in that maintain and follow through. And so if we were working together, if we could agree on a plan, and neither of us are going to be too rigid about the plan, but that could kind of be our common ground that we could come back to help us with some of the other modes where we might have more potential for conflict. We could solve them through that planning mode.
Okay. And then lastly, Elizabeth, we have that 4th category, and that is around the implementer or demonstrator.
Yes.
And for me, I had a 2, so maybe we can talk about that and then what that other end looks like.
Yeah. So people who lead in this, so like 7 through 10, they really have a need to demonstrate with physical or tangible. It's like concrete versus abstract at the other end. So people who lead in this, which in the online space, I don't meet many people who lead in this mode, because part of leading in this mode is wanting to be like using your hands or being physically in person with people. So you don't see as many in the online space in that 7 through 10. And then people at the other end, they envision. So they create, they can conceptualize solutions. They envision. They're not as, they don't spend as much time and energy with the physical space or the tangible items. This would show up a lot more if you had a product-based business, where you would really want to either have yourself or partner with somebody who's in that 7 through 10 space to make sure that the product is like, going to have good quality parts and the equipment, that kind of thing.
Okay. Interesting. I know we've touched on this just a little bit, but one of the questions that I get asked most often, especially talking with companies and teams, is, okay, this is really interesting about the Enneagram, the different descriptions, but now how do I use it? Like, what do we actually do with it? So I'm going to ask you the same thing about the Kolbe. How, like, where in the company, where in the process do you see the Kolbe being most effective for application?
Yes. So I think the most powerful ways to use it are in job alignment and in communication. So Kolbe, we've been talking all about the Kolbe A index, which is usually the first introduction to Kolbe people have. But there are several other assessments that they have available, including the Kolbe B, which you take on your role. And it shows, when you compare the two, it is going to highlight places where you're likely stressed out. And then the idea is you're a risk for burnout, because if your job is requiring you to behave in a way that doesn't come naturally to you, again, it's not that you can't do it. And sometimes really qualified, capable people can do it for a long time, but they're feeling it on the other end. They're coming home drained, and eventually it could either lead to burnout or leaving. And often there can be a way, once you understand where the point, what's causing that problem, sometimes there are ways to rework the job that they can still get that result, but in a different way, doing it in a way that comes more naturally to them. So it's just a great tool for leaders to kind of initiate those conversations with their team members in an objective way. Because what I love about it and what I think is so powerful is, without Kolbe, things aren't working, right? And there's frustration and you can tell something's not working, but you could mistakenly think, oh, I hired the wrong person. Like, they don't have the skill set, even though everything on paper looked like they do, or they do seem to know how to do it, but they're just not doing it in the way that you want. Or you could think it's a personality conflict. And, if you don't have ways to tease that out, so often, like, people part ways because they just think it's not a good fit. And it might have been, so I would encourage people, if they think they have the right person, they went through all the steps in hiring, but something's not quite right. Kolbe gives you another tool, and it's objective. It comes with a report that helps, I can come in and facilitate those conversations. So it kind of equips the leader with a way to have those conversations that feels like there's this third objective party in the room, this Kolbe analysis that can identify some points on what's not working about that role for that person based on their strengths, not based on faults. So that would be the job alignment. Any questions about that before I go into the communication piece?
No, that sounds incredibly valuable and needed in a lot of situations, for sure.
Yeah. And yes, there are times that it might show this person isn't the best fit for the job, but more often than not, there's a way you can rework the job or the expectations, either from the person or the supervisor, to make that a good match. And then the other piece of it is the communication. once you know where you sit, and then especially if you know where the other people in the room, their approach, it can really help for more productive communication. Like, for example, on the fact-finding mode, for everybody, no matter where you sit on fact-finding, in a group situation, it's always going to be more productive to go to the bottom line and provide all of the detailed justifications in like support materials that people can read on their own, or, so even if I want all of that detail, we don't need to discuss it in a group situation. That's not going to be the most effective. So there's a couple things like that in each mode that can help, or just even whenever conflict comes up, there's definitely understanding the approach in each of these modes can help you appreciate where the other person's coming from.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, I know that you work with individuals and teams specifically for these issues: entrepreneurs, job alignment, communication, conflict, that kind of thing. I have a couple more rapid fire questions, but before we get to that, tell us a little bit about how you are specifically working with people, where we can find out more about you, connect with you on social media, that type of thing.
Yes, thanks for asking. So the the main place to start, I would say, would be to do a Kolbe interpretation, which is what you and I did. It's so funny because you called it a reading, and it does feel that way sometimes. I've actually started to say to people, if I sound like a fortune teller, please stop me. Like, I want to check in, and this is what this report's saying. But the main goal of the interpretation is to check in with you and validate it. Does this feel accurate for you? How is it showing up for you? And see if these numbers, see how they are showing up. So so that would be the place to start. I would say probably for everybody, if you've never sat down with someone and had an interpretation, we do it in a 15-minute call. And that really gives us a chance to validate the results for you and get into some of the ways you can apply them. And then working with teams. And this can be even a small team, even 2 people. If you're working with that person regularly in your business, it can really be powerful to understand this about each other. But coming into, a team of 8, a team of 10, I can do it virtually, I can do it in person, and helping you, everybody on the team takes the Kolbe. So I have all that information and do an analysis of how your team can communicate more effectively, work more productively.
And then where are you on the internet? How do we learn about it?
Thank you. So ElizabethCookConsulting.com is my website. And I'm most active on LinkedIn, just at Elizabeth Cook. And I'd love to connect with you there. So I am showing up there pretty regularly. So that's a great place. If you just want an introduction to Kolbe and how you can use it as a place to dip your toe in, that's a good place to start.